I think what people aren't necessarily ready for is the reality that what worked for them previously might not work in medical school, and the study skills and habits that did fine for them in undergrad might not work because of the pace and volume and density of material that's coming at you in medical school. And so you might have to adjust your style of learning and studying that you've been using for years and years and years.
Hello, everyone. We are here with another fantastic guest, Dr. Jeffery SooHoo. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your path to medicine?
Sure. I think the reason I'm on this podcast is I'm the Assistant Dean of Admissions at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. So that's one of the hats that I wear. My clinical training is in ophthalmology, so I do cataracts and glaucoma in my clinical work. I'd say my path to medicine is maybe both traditional and not traditional. Didn't have any doctors in my family. Didn't really know what it meant to be a doctor, but took some biology courses in high school and sort of got set down a path of considering science, and sort of a natural extension of that was considering going to medical school. So I was pre-med in college, and the way I think about medicine is different though than how I originally thought about it. I think I thought about it as, well, this is a way to, interact with people and take care of people and use science. And that's all true, of course. But I think about it much more in a vocational way at this point in my career. When I went to college, they had about halfway through college, you could go on this vocational retreat to try and sort of think about what you wanted to do with your life. And the person that spoke at that retreat always said, the best vocation is the intersection of three things: something that brings you joy, something you're good at, and something that fulfills a need in the world. And for me, medicine has remained that, just that ability to take care of people at their most vulnerable or when they really need care is a privilege that I don't take for granted. So that's sort of, I got into medicine just because of science and whatnot, but the reasons I stay in medicine are a little bit different now.
I love that, and I love how your perspective changed over time. It evolved, because that is definitely something the students who are kind of our listeners are typically pre-meds and medical students. And over time, you guys will see that you may be thinking about your why. And that's very important as you think about applying, because it's a long, arduous process. So I always tell any student, and it sounds weird with me having this podcast, but if there's absolutely anything you can think about doing aside from medicine, try that first. And then if you still have the calling for it, definitely go for it. But once you get into the journey of becoming a physician, and once you're a physician, there may be different phases in life and different reasons why you do what you do.
Absolutely.
So, as you mentioned, you're the Assistant Dean of Admissions and Student Affairs. And a lot of times when I have guests who work in admissions on the show, we'll talk about like the steps of how to have a great application and how to interview and all of those kinds of things. But I think that it would be fun for us to chat about something a little different. Let's chat about the other side once you get in. So some students can have an adjustment period when they come. Of course, we always talk about how it's kind of getting information like a fire hose, like being shot at you and things like that. So there may be some struggle when you first enter medical school and start the first year. What are some things that you see that students struggle with?
Yeah, I see a whole bunch of different things, and everybody sort of reacts to the rigors of medical school in different ways. I see sometimes that people are surprised by how hard it is. And I'm always sort of surprised that people are surprised, because and what I say to them is, did you think medical school was easy? Like, who gave you that idea? Why would you think it's easy? It's definitely not easy. The flip side to that, of course, is it's not impossible, or you and I wouldn't be sitting here, right? I mean, people go to medical school and finish medical school all the time. I think what people aren't necessarily ready for is the reality that what worked for them previously might not work in medical school, and the study skills and habits that did fine for them in undergrad might not work because of the pace and volume and density of material that's coming at you in medical school. And so you might have to adjust your style of learning and studying that you've been using for years and years and years. The other thing I see people doing, or more accurately not doing, is not asking for help soon enough. I think medical students got to medical school by succeeding, and they often had that ability to sort of muscle through or power through, or, just nose to the grindstone, get it done. And that actually doesn't always work in medical school. And there's a lot of resources that are available that students might not know about if they don't ask. So I'll have a student come to me with a particular problem and I say, oh, I'm certainly going to help you, but man, I wish you had come to me 2 months ago when this first started. We're a little behind the 8 ball now. We could have, plugged you in with XYZ resource on campus. So I think that also that asking for help, I think medical students aren't as used to it because they probably didn't need as much help in undergrad or they wouldn't have been as successful as they were.
Absolutely. It's so important to realize that you may need help. And I think with some of the personalities of students who pursue medicine, it's kind of hard to ask for help. So I know when I was in medical school, like most people who are in medical school, you did really well in undergrad and you were like, oh, this is memorization easy. But I realized quite early on that I needed a tutor. And that was something that I struggle with because I'm like, I don't need a tutor. Like, I tutor people. Like, what is this? But coming to those kind of getting over yourself and your ego is important. And like you said, figuring out what works for you and being adaptable to change. So what may have worked for you even with one particular course or area may not work in terms of studying for a different type of section or studying for your boards and exams. What resources do you think that students should explore as they start the first year? Are there any recommendations on how to start off strong?
I think one of the tough things is that there's almost too many resources, and it's hard to pick and choose among all the various things. And if you ask, one person what they did, they'll give you an answer. The next person says something different, and it's just hard to try all the different things. So I do think that people should start off with what seems to be most similar to them to how they've studied in the past. I don't think they should try and wholesale change everything on the first day or the first course just because it's medical school. Because, yeah, maybe the stuff you did previously will work for you. I'm not saying that it won't. And then the other thing I recommend is making incremental changes. So if you're struggling at the beginning, try one new resource. Don't try 7. And I do think peers are a really good resource as well. If you see someone that's either the year ahead of you or same year and they seem to be doing well, ask them, what are you doing? And you don't necessarily have to do exactly what they're doing, but just sort of take it all in and just try different things, but one at a time so you can really get a sense of what's working and recognize that you've got a lot of time to figure it out. You could fail the first test of medical school. And in fact, I know a lot of people that have failed the first test in medical school and be just fine because it's one test. And as you and I know, there's a lot of tests in medical school. So failing one somewhere along the way is actually not that big a deal. It just feels like a big deal because of what you and I were talking about before. These are people that are not used to failing tests. Mm-hmm. And so it's not a referendum on you or that you're not smart enough or that you can't cut it. You just need to do something a little bit differently.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I love that you mentioned to utilize your peers because someone may have learned about a new resource that helped them, or they may have struggled with the test before and they figured out a new mechanism and they're more than willing to share because it's hopefully not that competitive vibe at your school where everyone's out for themselves. Everyone is there to become a doctor. You're going to be a great doctor. Like, work together and not against each other.
Yeah, I think that's something that surprises people is how collaborative it really is.
Yeah.
And the other thing is your peers might have, and they do have different backgrounds than you. So you might have someone sitting next to you that has a master's in biochemistry, and they can help you with biochemistry, and you might know more about anatomy if you did more anatomy before medical school or whatever it might be. So your peers are a really great resource.
Absolutely. And then I find another thing that students may struggle with. As you mentioned, people may be doing very well in a particular topic. So you may see someone who takes an exam in 15 minutes and you're like, I'm sitting here the whole hour and a half. So it's also trying not to compare yourself because like you said, different people have different backgrounds and different skill sets and different strengths. So someone may be an excellent test taker, but may struggle a little further down the line when it gets to the clinical realm with the bedside manner or organizing their reports and things. So working together is so important so that everyone can shine and learn from one another.
Absolutely.
So in terms moving back to the admissions realm, we do talk a lot about how students can showcase their best assets kind of during the application process, the interview process. Do you have any key tips for people to kind of present themselves in their best light?
I mean, I think it's important to, of course, know what your strengths are and know what you're passionate about, and understand, how that aligns with a medical school or being a physician. And medical schools have some unique attributes or things that they're looking for to some degree, but the vast majority of medical schools are probably more alike than they are different. And they're looking for people with, certain skills and competencies, of course, academic skills so that you can, pass the test. But as you said, bedside manner, which translates to empathy, verbal communication skills, things like that. So definitely understanding what they're looking for, I think, is important. And then the other thing I often talk about is making sure that sort of what you're presenting is congruous with what you've done leading up to your application to medical school. So if you write an essay or you're in an interview and you're telling me all about how much you love the community and want to give back, and you haven't done any volunteer work ever, that doesn't jive for me, right? That doesn't make sense. That's not a story that matches your activities. So really make sure that the things that you're doing, the things that you're passionate about, the things that you're able to speak about, that you're able to back it up with some real experience. And then the other thing that I think is really important is the ability to reflect on your experiences and show that you've learned something from those things and grown. Because I might see a line item on someone's application, a leadership opportunity or a volunteer opportunity, but the way someone talks about it can be very, very different. You could say, I volunteered at the soup kitchen, and I could say, what was that like? You could say, it was really great. Like, the people were really, really thankful. I really enjoyed it. Okay. Or you could give me a more nuanced, reflective answer, right? Where you say, I really, working at the soup kitchen helped me understand sort of the intersection between food insecurity and housing and healthcare, and how those things are all interconnected, and how social determinants of health and how someone's sort of background, opportunities, upbringing, education, how all those things might come together to create a situation where they need support around food. And having those, faces to the names and really hearing their stories helps solidify that for me.
Absolutely. Storytelling is one of the most important things that you can do, especially when you're in an interview or presenting your application, because it's the only time that you'll be able to express your why. So like you said, your first example, you're like, okay, they like volunteering, they chose the soup kitchen, but now you see that they are passionate about it, they want to serve, they've even researched topics in healthcare to be able to use some of those words to describe what they're envisioning and what they're seeing in terms of like social determinants. They learned that because they were able to kind of apply those principles to what they were doing. So it kind of makes you want to learn more about them.
Absolutely. So it's not just the words on the paper, but what did you learn by doing it? And what are you reflecting back to me?
Absolutely. So you guys definitely interview a lot of people in all of the schools because there are a lot of applicants. So sometimes a person may be waitlisted or even not gain admission on their first attempt or second attempt. What advice do you have for people who may need to go at this again?
Yeah, so if you don't get in, either don't get in or don't get off a wait list and you have to go at it again, I think it's really important to hopefully have an outside some person look at your application and say, where did you go wrong? What happened? And one of the things you can look at is the numbers from your previous cycle. So did you apply to enough schools? Did you apply broadly enough? If you got 10 interviews and got rejected at all of them, then you probably have an interview problem and you need some interview coaching and you need some interview practice. If you applied to 50 schools and got 0 interviews, your paper application is not that compelling. So why is that? Are your academic metrics below average for every place that you applied to? Are you, and then think of the big categories, right? So we look at clinical work, volunteer work, leadership, scholarship, research. What do you have those things or some of those things in depth longitudinally? And if not, what are your gaps and how do you fill it in? So whether that's additional coursework, whether that's retaking the MCAT, whether it's a more one-on-one longitudinal patient care experience, what maybe you need to finish the research project that you started, it's really just individual at that level. But what I tell people is, either they applied incorrectly, they interview badly, or there's something wrong with their paper application.
That's great advice. Speaking of advice, I love to hear kind of what you wish you knew before you started your medical journey. So what would you say is a piece of advice that you think is imperative for those who are entering the medical profession?
It's sort of a concept, and I stole it from another admissions team that I heard on a podcast who was talking about what they were looking for in students. But it's the concept of tolerance of ambiguity, which means in all these different things that we do, whether it's, taking this first course in medical school and struggling, whether it's transitioning from the preclinical space to the clinical space, whether it's switching rotations or switching hospitals where I was really comfortable at pediatrics at the children's hospital and today I'm on OB at the adult hospital and I don't even know where the bathroom is. I don't know what my role is on this particular team. I'm not sure what specialty I want to go into. You really have to be very comfortable with not knowing. And it's very uncomfortable for people that have been on a certain path for a number of years and that are used to knowing what the next step is or what's going to happen in any given moment or any given day. So if you can just sort of let go of some of those expectations and sort of be able to go with the flow in certain situations, I really think it's tremendously helpful.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. My final question for you, since you have kind of shared so many pearls of wisdom, we all know that the U.S. healthcare system is so perfect, but if you had a magic wand and you could change anything about the U.S. healthcare system, what would you change?
I don't know that we have enough time for my thoughts on this question. There's so many different things. One is that the incentives throughout the system are entirely misaligned. So something that's good for a patient, we care about the patients, right? Something that's good for a patient that may or may not be actually the best thing for the provider. It might not be the best thing for the hospital. It might not be the best thing for Medicare and Medicaid or the insurance provider. It might not be the best thing for the pharmaceutical company. It seems silly in some ways, but those things should be aligned, whereas what's best for the patient is what's best for everybody and it's best for the system as a whole. It's sort of a buzzword or tagline, but one of the other things is that, our healthcare system is really based around sick care, right? So let's wait for someone to get really sick and then we're going to do all this stuff to them that's really expensive. And we don't have a good handle in the healthcare system, and certainly as a provider who's often providing care for people that have a problem, we don't have a good handle on the preventive stuff. The things you and I were talking about earlier, social determinants of health, those things don't all talk to one another, right? The hospital system you or I might work at doesn't directly interface with the neighborhood food pantry or the vaccine clinic or, the K through 12 educational system, right? Those things don't all talk to one another. And if our goal is true health, those things would need to talk to one another. And then finally, it's a little bit antiquated in terms of how it came about, but the tie of employer-sponsored health insurance, which came about, I think around World War II, as a way to sort of incentivize workers without increasing their pay. And at the time, health insurance for companies wasn't as expensive. But now having that tie where it's harder to move jobs potentially, or having those things tied to one another, again, doesn't entirely make sense. And if you were going to design the system from the ground up, you probably wouldn't do it that way. Those are a few thoughts. I could go on for a while. I think there's something amazing things that we do. And the people that I work with in the healthcare system are amazingly dedicated to taking care of patients. And I've had really amazing moments in my career taking care of people. So I don't want to discount any of that. But there are some aspects of the system that certainly could be better if you're going to give me that magic wand you promised me.
I love it, and I wish that my magic wand worked because you shared so many pearls. We might have to have another episode where you're back and we just talk about these things because each of them was so important. One, we do need to have a patient-centric healthcare system. All of the incentives, all of the different things that people are definitely profiting off. Healthcare is a $1 billion industry. Why don't we have healthy people for all of the money that we spend is so important. Number two, having that addressing the social determinants of health. It's not just healthcare. Healthcare just makes up 20% of our health. It's everything that comes around about it. We definitely need to start a movement where we can address those and not just address it to have these buzzwords thrown out, but actually sit and address it. For those, this is my personal plug. For those listening out there, definitely look at thepacemakers.com because we're trying to do something about it. But we definitely need a community of people to start that revolution until we ask about it. And then for employer-based delights, because they dangle it there, and being a healthy, personally, I think healthcare is a human right, but since America doesn't, we're able to dangle things like, hey, work for us to see your doctor, or pay all this money through the Affordable Care app, or where most people can't even afford that. So whole nother chat, but those are some things that I think that the students who are listening have an opportunity to impact as you're entering the system and thinking of new ways to help us navigate it to get us to the new frontier.
Absolutely.
So it was such a delight to have you on. I'm just going to give you an opportunity to say goodbye to our listeners.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to everybody listening. Best of luck wherever you are in your journey. And thank you for taking the time to listen to me and let me share my thoughts today.
Thank you so much for coming, and for all of the listeners out there. Definitely share this with your friends. This is going to be released in an interesting time where some of you guys will be just starting your first weeks of medical school, and some of you guys will be preparing for the application cycle. So it's definitely an opportunity to share the wealth and share the information and start these conversations with your classmates. And definitely click that subscribe button. We're on YouTube now, so if you want to see our facial reactions, you can see that. And definitely reach out to us on @MedSchoolCoach on Instagram, or @Dr. DeGram, DOCTOR, the letter DGRAM, to let us know if there are any topics that you want to cover or any guests that you would like for me to invite. See you again next week. Bye.
Each episode of the Prospective Doctor podcast is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access articles, videos, webinars, and free tools to help you succeed on your journey toward med school and beyond, visit our website, prospectivedoctor.com. We hope you tune in again next time.